London has got a very, very high concentration of sake experts in the field who are making London one of the leading cities in the world to enjoy sake. Yeah, absolutely. Most definitely. And I think our next guest is one of those pioneers, well, not so much pioneers, but in terms of advocates. Yeah, indeed. Absolutely, absolutely. So we've got, let's see, it's about that time. Let's see if we can maybe, is our next team from over in the UK with us?
We're here.
We are here.
That's a familiar voice. There we are.
Can you hear us all? That's great.
We can. Yeah, absolutely. Wonderful. So nice to see all of you.
You too, you too. You're looking lovely with your sake backdrop.
Good morning. Thanks for getting up with us, or having lunch with us, I guess. So great to see you guys. We're super excited to hear about the UK. We've been kind of hopscotching around Europe this evening here. We went France, we went Spain. Now we're kind of hopping over your direction. Getting teasingly close towards you, Ollie.
That's what I like to hear.
So, but before we hand off over to you, because Ollie, you're going to be master controller on this one. So, just a quick check-in, how are things in the UK at the moment? We've sort of been seeing reports of the second lockdown and fairly high, spikes in COVID. Are you all coping okay over there?
To be determined, sadly. I mean, it's very difficult to know what the impact of. We're in, as you said, we're in another lockdown now, which is due to finish on the 2nd of December and will have lasted another month since it was enforced. And we had a longer lockdown earlier in the year. And so the impact, obviously, of having a lockdown right now during the run up to Christmas, having followed another lockdown that was earlier is, it's going to probably, I imagine it's going to be pretty serious. There was a poll the other day, an industry poll of restaurants and pubs and bars. And sadly, the response to that from the members of the industry was that 85% of current owners of hospitality venues think they will not be able to continue in the new year.
Wow. And so in this market, bringing sake into the market and bringing sake to the next level has got some added challenges, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
I'm sure we're looking forward to hearing more about that story, more about that conversation in your session, Ollie.
Well, we're ready to go when you are.
Excellent. Then with that, Oliver, we will go ahead and turn it over to you and your guests. We'll let you introduce the crew you have behind you there, and you can be off. And we'll check in with you here in about 50 minutes or so.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Justin. Thank you, Rebecca. Cool. So hi to everyone around the world. It's very exciting, this Sake Summit. My name's Ollie Hilton-Johnson. I run a company called Tengu Sake in the UK, and we import sake into the UK and distribute wholesale retail. We'll be talking about how that works in the UK later. I'm joined by 3 fantastic people. I'm very, very excited to have them here. I'll start with Miho Komatsu, who joins us from as the marketing and international sales rep for Akashi-tai Brewery, based in Hyogo Prefecture. And she's also the sake specialist for Mauricio Beverages, the importer and distributor of Akashi-tai Brewery in the UK, but also globally. Mauricio Beverages are an international producer and distributor of prestigious wines, sakes, and spirits, got an annual turnover of about 250 million euros, and they're spread across 12 countries. I asked Miho to join us today because the way Akashi-tai works with Mauricio Beverages is very different to the way that I work with Tengu Sake, and we'll be exploring that later and contrasting those two. Also from the UK is Barry McCauley, who is a restaurateur, food and beverage development consultant, and sake sommelier. He's a bit of a startup guru. Whenever I talk to Barry, he's always starting up something, a pub, a bar, a restaurant, hotels, delivering lots of new concepts. And he's here to provide the kind of big picture for the UK alcohol market, because that's his area of speciality. And then finally, very excited to be joined by Akiko Konishi-san from Konishi Shuzo. She's the general manager of the international department. Konishi Shuzo is celebrating their 450th year this year, and her father, the CEO of Konishi Shuzo, is the 15th generation. Konishi Shuzo is the oldest brewery in Japan to be owned by a single family, and so they have generations and hundreds of years of experience in the market. And so it's absolutely fascinating to have her expertise there, and I'll be looking to her to give an international outlook and be able to compare with other markets, and of course the Japanese or the Japan-based point of view for this. So hi everyone, good to see you.
Good morning.
How's everyone? All right.
Hi, good morning.
Good. Yeah, it's morning here. I don't know where it is everywhere else, but it's morning here. So guys, what I thought we'd do is we'd start off by looking at some of the figures which might give us a bit of an understanding of how the UK market runs. And then I'll ask you guys to all comment on that, on those figures, and what you think about the UK market as it sits now. It'd be fascinating to hear from a Japan point of view and also from two industry insiders in the UK. So I'm going to share my screen now, and we can all have a look at these figures. I'll run through them quickly because we've got a lot of content to get through, I imagine. So I'll just rattle through them quickly, and then we can talk about them. So what's interesting about the sake exports, these are figures, these are Japan sake exports. It's difficult to track imports, I imagine globally, but I know for the UK, because there isn't a unique commodity code or isn't a unique identifier for sake. So it's lumped into wine. So it's very difficult to track the imports into the UK. But what we can look at is the exports from Japan. And as you can see here, since 1992, so a fair amount of time, there's actually not been a huge amount of increase in the volumes of sake to the UK. It's been going up and down, up and down, up and down. Since you know, you can arbitrarily just pick a year and compare it to now. It doesn't really help. But since 1992, there's only been a 22% increase. And if you compared it to 2018, for example, it's almost the same. There's really not been much of an increase at all. If you compare it to the year 2000, so the past 20 years, it's been about a 40% increase, but then since 2010, a 17% increase. So it very much goes up and down. So I'd like us to think about why that is. Let's contrast that, though, with the rest of Europe. So the rest of Europe very much looks like this. So the big players, again, these are exports from Japan. So at the top, you've got Germany, and they've had an 80% increase since the beginning of the decade. The UK, we're next. We've got that 17% increase since the beginning of the decade. Italy, 95% increase since the beginning of the decade. And then France. So those are the big four players. You can see the Netherlands is next, but as I say, these are exports from Japan, so I imagine that's actually because there's a very big port in the Netherlands, and so a lot of that sake is coming in and then being distributed around the rest of Europe rather than staying in the Netherlands. So those are the big guys. Interestingly enough, you've then got contrasted with that the value of the sake they import. So how much is a litre of sake worth that they're importing? Is it really high value stuff or is it low value stuff? And you can see Norway and Sweden are at the top there. The guys that we were looking at before, Germany being the biggest importer in terms of volume, actually has almost the lowest value per litre. So the quality of the stuff they're bringing in is potentially not as great as other markets. UK, we're the third biggest after the two Scandi countries, Norway and Sweden. And then Italy, who was the third biggest in terms of volume, is the lowest in terms of value. And then France is pretty much the same as the UK. It's that blue square. So I think that's a really interesting contrast. And if we get rid of the other countries and just focus in on those, we can see UK, France, Spain, Germany, Italy. They're the countries with the biggest value of sake. And you can see that the UK's value, despite since there's only been a 17% increase in volume since the beginning of since 2009. For the terms of value, there's been a 76% increase in terms of value, which I think is very, very interesting. So contrasting that volume versus value. Of course, it's difficult to understand these figures without looking at the population. So this is the volume per capita. The UK is the second largest after Germany, but almost the same. And then France is a little bit lower. But what's fascinating to see, and I'm sure you guys will pick up on this later, the volume of sake that is being consumed here is tiny. In the UK, we're talking a little bit over 50 milliliters per person. It's tiny, tiny, tiny. So I think we'll find some interesting ground to explore there. And then my final slide before I hand over to you is top European spend per capita. UK's number 1, France number 2, Germany, Italy. But again, this is only 5.5 yen per person. It's not a huge amount of money. So that's a good starting point, I think. And I'd like to turn over to Akiko-san first, from Konishi Shuzo. Would you be kind enough, Akiko-san, to give us the perspective of how the UK market sits from a Japan point of view? What do Japanese breweries think of the UK market?
Okay, so I think there are 2 points. First is when we talk about the UK market, it is 99% focusing on the London market. In other words, British sake market equal the London sake market. So geographically very concentrated. And second, London is the test market for new luxury items. Most breweries think London market is the market where you can find good wholesalers and restaurants who will purchase small but steady amount of high-end products. And well, including Konishi, it is very high competitive market for luxury items because many breweries targeting this item with luxury items. The characteristic of, well, London market is, from my point of view, compared to other European market, there are fewer Japanese restaurants, but average spending per customer is high. So I see upper middle to high-end restaurants, and I see many high-end restaurants and less izakaya, really cheap izakaya type restaurant in London or in the UK. So,
that's very interesting.
Yeah, and the trend is evident from the statistics you show, Oliver-san. Yeah.
That's very interesting. So the Japanese view is very much that it's a luxury market and very London-centric. Would you, Miho and Barry, would you agree with that? Is that our perception of the UK market from being in the UK?
For my side, actually, we are going opposite of how other Japanese breweries are going on. So from the beginning, I wasn't looking at the Japanese community or Japanese distributor or retail shops, as I thought the potential is very low. Everybody is targeting in a small pond that, that we want to sell to the Japanese market. And then as a small brand, that it's not, the brand name is big, I thought I couldn't sell to the London market. So my target was more outside of London. However, it's not only izakaya or small outlet. We are also looking at more Western, more not Japanese oriented restaurants and retail shop, multiple, wine shops, and of course, like every possibility we could think of. So I think the target is a little bit different on my side.
Yeah, and in terms of your kind of availability in the UK, I would say that probably Akashi-tai is the easiest to find. Would you agree? The number of like off licenses I wander into, and Akashi-tai is the brand that appears, and I think that's because the method or the route to market that you've chosen by working with a large international distributor allows you to be put in places that people like me with my model struggle a little bit more on. Would you say that's true?
Yes, yeah. So I experience exactly same as what you are experiencing at maybe like 10 years ago. We face on us exactly same problem. And then I thought, how can I be different from others? And then how can I sell a different way? Do I need to go more like how other wines and spirits are sold in the UK? And then we thought, okay, let's do something different, and then let's do you know, bigger distributor to work with. And
Excellent.
then so you know, teaching those people who never deal with sake, those people kind of woke up saying, okay, let's sell sake. And then they had a really good relationship with us. So you know, of course, thanks to everybody, until now we could have more visibility in the UK market.
Thank you. Barry, your thoughts on the figures in the UK market in general?
Yeah, I think what's been said is absolutely correct. I mean, if you look at the way sake has grown primarily in value as opposed to volume, it's quite easy to see why. I mean, there's two things which are driving that. One is the restaurant focus. So the majority of sake in the UK is drunk in what we call the on-trade, so on-premise sales within restaurants or bars. And the second thing is the London focus. Now, when you take those two things combined, what you're actually doing is you've got a really, really small group of people you're actually talking to. You're speaking to sake sommeliers and influencers within the London restaurant market. Now, I can tell you right now, that's probably about 20, 25, maybe 30 people who are literally responsible for the distribution of most of the sake that comes into the UK. So if we're looking at how does sake grow, how does sake take more market share, how do we increase the consumption per capita? You know, I think there's two things. I mean, well, perhaps three things. Focus on perhaps the lower, more entry-priced end of the sake market. Looking outside of the restaurant sector, and of course, you know, the big elephant in the room is trying to get the supermarkets on board, because as you know, Ollie, as a UK consumer, the supermarkets are responsible for such a large chunk of any alcohol sales, be it wine, be it beer, whiskey, gin, whatever it is. And that has traditionally been an area that sake has found very, very difficult to penetrate.
Okay, great. So let's explore those different ideas one at a time. Let's first of all focus on the being able to target the kind of general population, so the lower end to the lower middle to middle end of the market. How can we attack those guys? So perhaps a useful exercise would be to contrast the price of sake in the UK that's available retail wise versus the kind of the average price for a bottle of wine. What would, Barry, what would that be?
Okay, well, let's look at it. Let's take it out of the restaurant context and let's look at it from a supermarket point of view. So for the average UK consumer, if you walked into a supermarket alcohol aisle and you wanted to pick something up for £5, you could get any number of beers, including many of the new craft beers. You could get yourself a bottle of wine. But you couldn't get yourself a bottle of sake. You know, I think if we're looking at an entry level retail price for a bottle of sake, I think the cheapest you'll probably find is probably about 12 or 13 pounds for the bottle. Now,
you might even be pushed to find that for a 7.
You might, and that would be, absolutely. I mean, you know, let's say 15. You know, for £15 for an average consumer, that is already what I would call a special spend. So it's a spend that consumers will do, but they'll do it for Christmas, or they'll do it for a birthday, or they'll do it for something like that. For a sort of everyday spend, what you're actually saying is you can get 3 bottles of wine for the price of 1 bottle of sake.
Yeah.
And if you look at it from that point of view and understand that most people don't know what sake tastes like or have very little experience of it, you're not going to triple your average spend in order to experience something new. And I think that's one of the really big barriers that sake has to overcome.
Interesting. Miho, is that your experience? That does that align with the prices of Akashi-tai sake in the UK? You know, the cheapest you're going to find is around about 13, 14, 15 pounds.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
That's the same with my portfolio as well.
Yeah, we try to, put down the price as much as possible. However, the cost itself and the shipping cost and everything, distributor fees, and then we cannot go much lower than we wish for.
Mm. So Akiko-san, I'm afraid I'm going to point my finger at you and say, as a producer of sake, is there anything that we can do? What contributes to the price of sake? Is there anything that can be done to lower that bottom end? Are we ever going to be able to find a bottle of sake for £5 in the UK? Your thoughts?
£5. Well, bluntly speaking, it is very hard, I say. Well, let me explain maybe 4 points. That first, making sake is very labor intensive and need at least 1.5 months only for brewing. So very long time for brewing compared to the other wine or beer, almost double. And as you know, to brew sake, we need to do a parallel fermentation process. And this is very complex and requires very sensitive expert attention. So this long and complex brewing process itself explains why sake is more expensive than wine. And second point is cost of rice. The price of rice is controlled by the government as one of the agricultural measures. And third, industry structure. Well, sake industry in Japan is comprised of many small breweries. I think this is similar as the wine industry too. In Japan, there are roughly 1,400 breweries. 54% of sake is produced by 11 breweries, big breweries, and 35% is produced by roughly 300 middle-sized breweries, and the rest 11% produced by small to tiny 1,100 breweries. What I say, 11 large, 300 middle, and 1,100 small breweries. So to lower export price, I think the middle-sized 300 breweries would be the key segment. Well, the middle-sized breweries has a potential to produce good quality sake in volume stably. But at the moment, many of them are not necessarily focusing on affordable sake, rather many focus on high-end. So, maybe international market has not expanded enough to encourage these breweries to make more investment, or maybe lack of effort or more effort needed from us too. And well, another thing is domestic pricing. Unlike European alcohol producers, where you can raise or lower the price year by year, domestic sake changes very little. So sake price was raised for the first time in 17 years, 3 years ago. And this is because retailers and wholesalers has the power to determine sake price. So therefore, the margin of profit for the breweries remain low. So it is very difficult to lower the export price further under this condition.
And
So,
your costs are going up, aren't they? Your costs are going up as well.
Yeah.
Right?
So while cost is going up, but we also we notice that we are noticing that export price should be lower when we want to expand sake market, but it is very difficult to do so.
Well, I think that's really fascinating what you said, because I think a lot of people, always say, how come sake isn't cheaper? Why can't you make it cheaper? To me, as an importer and seller of sake. And I think you've really beautifully outlined a lot of the reasons why it's very difficult to make sake at that kind of £5 price point. Because if we're looking at a £5 wine in the supermarket, Barry, how much are they buying that for from the producer, would you say?
I mean, you can get wine on the European market from places like Spain, Italy, or France for as much as, 1.2 euros, perhaps at the lower end, a couple of euros, something like that.
Yeah.
So the numbers, the numbers don't overly make sense for wine, even at that level, but, it's all possible. But based on what Akiko's just said, it's very clear that the actual economics of sake don't work when you're trying to address that sort of £5 price point. Yeah. £5 price point.
Which I guess is why the UK market has evolved the way it's evolved, and targeting that high-end luxury demographic, because once you get up, as previous speakers were saying in the France seminar a moment ago, is that top category, if they're spending thousands of pounds on a bottle of wine, then actually a few £100s on an excellent quality sake is a good deal. The difficulty is the bottom end. And I think we've kind of come to the conclusion that reducing the sake, being able to reduce the price of sake to a level where you're getting to the average price for a bottle of wine in the UK, which I believe is about £6.20, is never going to happen. So that seems to be probably a worldwide conclusion, but specifically for the UK market, because we have that £6.20 average price point, it seems to be just a reality that one needs to accept. And if we accept that, what else can we do? If we can't hit the bottom end, and we're hitting the top end at the moment, then I think, Miho, you were explaining it to me the other day in terms of sizes of ponds. Perhaps you could.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So if you don't imagine people is a fish. So there is maybe 2 ponds in the market around here. We are talking about feeding or giving a lot of choices, a lot of food to the small pond. And then small pond have probably already a lot of potential to choose from. When we look at the bigger pond or a larger pond, there is a fish living, but they don't have so much good food yet. And then they probably don't have any choices to choose from. They just eat to live. They just to, enjoy like everyday life, but not to explore. So they don't know where the good food, they don't know anything about it. So if we start feeding to the bigger pond, how about the fish? Probably fish family will grow. There is now maybe 100 fish living in a big pond, but we start to feed to the bigger pond with many other choices, many other achievable, good food to explore. Then probably those 100 fish can be, 500 soon, because they have really good food. So I thought maybe, it's not talking about how much to feed to the small pound. But we try to, the important next step is for us to look at the bigger pond. What can we do for the bigger pond? You know, let's try to do something to the bigger pond to get more attention and more visibility.
And in terms of demographic then, that bigger pond is, would you say is the next kind of income bracket down from where we're looking at now, or a few income brackets down, rather than trying to attack it from the bottom up and saying, let's get it, you know, let's try and reduce it to £5 a bottle or £6 a bottle. Perhaps we just need to try and get what we have right now, but to a larger audience, which can still afford it.
Right, right. So one good example is during the COVID, you know, very sad moment at the moment. There's one restaurant in London. They have been successfully selling 1,300 sparkling sake past few months when they just opened the restaurant. And I thought, you know, these people, if they go to the bigger pond and then talk about this experience or about this, you know, possibility about, you know, I have experienced such a nice food now, you know, you want to try. And then to get more kind of friends from those people, that's the next way to bring up the people who will try to the sake.
So that leads us on to how we do that. And I guess it comes down to the visibility of sake and how as a UK consumer, we encounter sake. Barry, you've already alluded to the fact that most sake is drunk at restaurants, right?
Yeah.
Whereas most wine is drunk at home.
Correct.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I think there's probably quite a few things to be done before sake actually gets to that level. I think, you know, where I see the opportunity is exactly what Miho was saying. If you think that the bigger pond is basically the rest of the UK, and you think that the bigger pond is potentially having people drink sake at home on a regular or semi-regular basis, then what needs to happen is the focus that has been given to the London market by sake breweries, sake educators, so on and so forth, needs to shift outside of London. And then there's no reason why we couldn't assume that we would see the same sort of numbers that you showed at the beginning of the presentation, Ollie, happening in those places. So yeah, you're not going to start off at the high price point that we're at in London, but you'll start off where London was 20 years ago, you know, selling those 14, 15-pound bottles of sake, and then potentially seeing the same sort of growth go up. What's not happening at the moment is, you know, the education, the tastings, the listings in restaurants and so on and so forth are not happening outside of London. So you won't see immediately people outside of London drinking sake at home. I mean, even in London now, I would say that most people who drink sake drink in restaurants, and even if they love sake, they don't necessarily take a bottle home.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's you know, when you go to a Japanese restaurant, you're in the vibe and you're in the atmosphere. And so and you're treating yourself, because Japanese restaurants are generally at a higher price point than most other offerings, right? And so
not only that, Ollie, not only that, a restaurant gives a customer confidence.
Yeah.
So if you're going to a restaurant with a good reputation, good food, you feel, if you want to try sake for the first time, you will feel, right, I'm confident that this is the right environment to do it. They are, you know, sourcing the right food, the right ingredients, therefore they're sourcing the right sake. Therefore, if I take that risk, if you like, and spend a little bit more than I normally would, this is the place to do it. And I think
we're doing quite well on, sorry to interrupt, we're doing quite well on the getting sake into non-Japanese restaurants front as well, I think. I mean, you go to a lot of Michelin star restaurants or restaurants that are interested in food pairings and, you know, a higher price point and so on, there is usually a sake on the list there. So actually, I think we've done quite well on that front. I think on to the next level.
I think you're absolutely right. But, you know, from a consumer point of view, whether the restaurant is French, Italian, they do tend to be at the higher end of the market. And they give the same confidence. We've got to a point where somewhere like the Gavroche can instill the same level of confidence into a customer to try sake as any of the Japanese restaurants. I think that's but whether or not that is happening outside of London, I think far less.
Agreed. So we touched
and that's
on
the big pond. That's where the big pond is. It's outside of London.
Yeah, totally. I mean, London's a population of 7.5 million. The next biggest city is Birmingham, which is just shy of 1 million people. So there's a huge discrepancy from the biggest city in the country to the next biggest city in the country. Yet there's, you know, similar spread of demographic in that in Birmingham or Manchester or Liverpool or whatever. And there's lots of people that are, you know, excited about food, excited about, you know, Liverpool's the city of culture. There's lots of availability out there for people to try new things. It's just one of those new things needs to be sake, and that's kind of Miho and my responsibility with the other people to make that happen.
That one big problem we have is how do we feed to the bigger pond? So for example, if there is a food coming into this pond, suddenly if you say, okay, 100 pounds of food is coming into this pond, they don't know what it is, they don't know what to choose, they don't know whether maybe it's poison or they are good. Somebody need to tell, this is a great food to try. So how do we do? So we cannot always talking about, you know, expensive restaurant or, you know, very expensive sake. We need to have some possibility that people can try. And that way is almost like, you know, during this COVID time, people goes to supermarket, they go to small wine shop in a corner convenience store to buy food. And then if we don't have on those places, how can people take it from home? So we need to feed in that area.
I think you have to be right. Otherwise, we're just going to create the same problem that we have in London in another city, where only the top best restaurants there have sake, and then below that, it's not happening.
So we're going to create many small ponds everywhere.
Exactly.
So we need to have some, you know, everybody can try. People will say, okay, oh, there is a, you know, 3-4 different sake to choose from supermarket. That's really great. You know, when I was, you know, doing education, not only in the UK, but I do also for the United States, I sometimes feel maybe UK might be, you know, like 10 years late, you know, behind of USA market, for some certain area. When I go to the USA, there is a made in USA sake. There is like, you know, a local made sake that's it's available maybe in a petrol station, convenience store. You know, every corner shop has already the sake. So people knows the word of sake. So, yesterday I was interested enough talking with one of my very good friend in Japan, and then she said, you know, chopstick, people in a, you know, chopstick, they know about the word, they know how to use a chopstick. Okay, and then if somebody say, okay, I can use a chopstick, that's really great, that's cool. And then, you know, talking about sake, I know about sake, I heard about sake, but I don't know how to use, or how I never tried to use a chopstick, for example.
That's a good point. Akiko-san, you were talking about Beaujolais Nouveau and how that's caught on in Japan, and a similar potential or possibility or something, some sort of marketing solution for sake. What were you saying?
Beaujolais Nouveau from France was definitely, now it's a big trend every year. Because I think French government push the wine and the seasonal trend into Japanese market, Japan market very hard, using big money, I think, and promotion. So they spend many costs to expand the wine category, wine market in Japan. Not just Beaujolais Nouveau market, whole wine market was expanded when French government, government of France, government of Italy has pushed that category. So our government also pushing hard, very supportive now, and but maybe we need some more time to expand sake enough to call a big pond.
Yeah, that governmental intervention and support is, I would suggest, relatively new, no, for sake? I mean, it's fantastic just doing what we're doing right now and the efforts that JSS are making. I mean, in the UK at the moment, there's obviously what we're talking on right now. There's also a sake photography competition that's sponsored by JSS. JSS have got their education course every year. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that is, again, relatively new. It's absolutely fantastic that they're doing that. But comparing, as you were just saying then, the support that the governmental support or trade body support that is given to sake compared to, let's say, if I bring you in again, Barry, in the wine world, how would that compare there? What's the sort of support for French wine, German wine, Chilean wine?
Well, I mean, I'll be honest. I don't think it can compare really. You know, the support. If you look at wine, I mean, in almost any week of the year, I would be invited to 1 or 2 wine tastings every single week of the year. And there are certain times of the year where it will be 2 or 3 a day. So many that there's actually too much. But if you look at it, you know, there is a sort of an umbrella body, which would be, you know, national. So there'd be an Italian wine body, a French wine body. But then it drills down into the regions. There's regional bodies. Then there's stylistic bodies for certain styles of wine, like sparkling or rosé. Then you've got seasonal things. I mean, the most obvious example of hugely successful seasonal wine drinking is champagne at Christmas. I'm pretty sure that if you go back far enough, Christmas did not necessarily include the drinking of champagne. But in this country now, you pretty much, you know, even if you don't drink a single drop of champagne throughout the year, you're pretty much having a glass of champagne at Christmas. So so champagne has done really well positioning itself alongside celebrations of all kinds. And if you look how they've done that, not only are there massive discounting and special offers and all kinds of promotional work around those seasons, but, you know, for how many years now have we watched Formula One, and champagne is the one product that is gleefully wasted all over the place as part of a celebration? You know, they've done that really, really well. Let's be honest, that has actually, you know, everyone knows that, whether we're from Japan, whether we're from England, anywhere in the world. Now, I can't think of anything where sake has done anything on the same sort of scale, with anywhere near as much sort of just anywhere near the width of the spread of what they've done. You know, sake does small things here and there, and that's great, but it's just not enough. It's just not enough to capture the imagination of a nation.
Because it's not even a new wine within the wine category, or a new beer within the beer category, a new spirit, it's a whole new category.
It's a whole new category. I mean, look at craft beer recently, right? Craft beer has gone from nowhere to being on every supermarket shelf in the country in about what, 8-10 years? Now, sake, as we looked on the graphs back from 1990, 30 years ago, has not, you know, has got it's nowhere near that. Now, you also have to look at what craft beer has done. Craft beer has actually changed the fundamental pricing structure of beer. You know, maybe 10, 12 years ago in this country, buying a pint for more than £4 would be seen as totally ridiculous. You know, there's pubs in London, you know, me and Ollie like a craft beer, so we are some of these customers who have really gone for this. But there's pubs in London now where you can buy beer for, you know, £7 a pint, £8 a pint, and it's acceptable.
So
and
they're the big ponds, right, for the sake market.
Correct, exactly what I'm saying. But there's never been a push like that for sake. Never been. I mean, you know, it hasn't happened yet.
So, I mean, all these organizations, these kind of regional organizations that you're talking about in the wine world, they exist in the sake world as well, but they're just, I guess, very domestically focused. They're not internationally focused. And so hopefully, I mean, just as I was saying, with the support that's coming through now from Japan, which is so, I'm so thankful for it. It's fantastic. You know, if there's more and more and more of that over the years, then hopefully the investment that you're describing may be forthcoming. But there's certainly something to be said about larger kind of organizations, not just because Akiko-san, as you were saying, it's a big burden for a single brewery to take on the entire marketing strategy for sake. It's not doable, really. So it needs to be that sake breweries can come together under one umbrella, which is what JSS is and what JSS is doing, to be able to coordinate marketing. And I would suggest there's also an opportunity in the UK for UK importers, distributors, to form a similar organization where they can all collaborate together and produce data, produce coherent and coordinated marketing campaigns that benefits the entire market rather than an individual importer, which would allow us to spread outside of London and allow us to hit that bigger pond that we've all been talking about.
Ollie, I think that's really valid. I mean, and just going quickly back to the craft beer example, it's the collaboration. It's lots and lots of people coming together, because most craft beer breweries are quite small. But they came together and created this wave that just caught consumers, and people were interested. They wanted to know about it. And, you know, it's doing things like getting 2 breweries together and doing collaborative brews and things like that. I've never seen anything like that in sake. You know, where... It does happen.
But again, it's very domestic focused. And it requires an importer to recognize it and import it and say, this is what this is all about. It's not coming from the breweries themselves pushing that out. That's an evolution, I guess, of attitude from the domestic to the international, and hopefully international bodies like JSS can provide that support to facilitate that kind of attitude and that kind of marketing. Hopefully.
I have just a quick question for Akiko. Akiko, just on this point, is there the desire? Is there a desire to really look at the international market? And by that I mean take the focus off the domestic market, which we know is declining, and put the whole focus and almost all the resources on the export market. Because it seems strange to me, Ollie, what you're saying is, you know, Akiko's already identified that, you know, the breweries and, you know, consumption in Japan are, you know, either going down or have plateaued for many years. So why then are all these marketing activities focused locally? That seems strange to me.
Well, there is few breweries who were very focused on the international market and, well, not selling many amount for the maybe 10% for the domestic and the rest of 95% to the foreign market. But it's very few. And why maybe we not yet switching our mind enough to broaden the market by ourselves too. So that should be done by maybe our generation, but it takes time to change in mind. So well, as already introduced us, we have a long history of brewery. Then we have many loyal customers in Japan too. So we can, you know, not good words, but abandon them and shift into the international market. So that is our
But there are things that you can do which you've already done, for example, with the new Konishi brand versus your traditional Shirayuki brand, for example.
So thank you, Ori, for your help. Well, our strategy for the foreign market is approaching with the two brands. One is Shirayuki, and the new one is Konishi. So Shirayuki is our traditional brand using, this is brand carry a long tradition and rich and complex taste. It is maybe a little bit difficult to understand for the new to the sake people. So the beginners, I say. In addition to Shirayuki, we launched a new Konishi brand in 2013. So the aim was to focus on the young generation here in domestic and international customers who are new to the sake experience. Yeah, thank you. So the gateway sake, Hiyashibori, is one of the signature sake for Konishi brand. We hope to cultivate new customers of sake with Konishi and gradually expand fans for Shirayuki. And so we targeted expand sake market with Konishi brand and then deepen the loyalty with Shirayuki. So in UK and European countries, I think this strategy has worked quite well since many distributors handle both Konishi and Shirayuki brand. Customers are introduced to sake through Konishi brand, and then attracted to the deep sake world, so I can say, with Shirayuki. As you see, label is also easy to remember with water drop figures.
So thank you, Akio-san. I think this is a really great example of good branding for, you know, an international market. It's very easy to see recognize the sake, remember the sake. It's got some English on the front label. It's got Japanese on the front label, which we know from market research consumers in the UK resonate with. Another great example is what Akashi-tai do as well. So this is Akashi-tai recently went through a rebrand. And they used a UK-based branding company to come up with this. So what I was going to do, we're running out of time, Miho-san, so I'm apologize. But again, it's very important for the international market. So we need to wrap up now, guys, and hand back to the studio. So I'm just going to, for our viewers, summarize what we've talked about. So we started with talking about the price of sake. Can we reduce it? At the bottom end, the answer was no, we can't, for all Akiko-san outlined. The only way we could possibly reduce it at the bottom end is if the market increased so drastically that we can do bulk importing and bottle it in the UK. But we're nowhere near that yet. I'm nowhere near importing 24,000 liters of sake for one sake. So rather we need to make a bigger pond and attract slightly lower than the top end that we're doing now. So move down in the demographic market. How do we do that? Visibility, expand outside of the London market into that bigger pool, move more consumption of sake out of restaurants into the off trade and into people consuming at home. Look for support from Japan. Do support in the UK by creating a kind of trade body that we can get behind, that can do research and that sort of stuff. And as a final thought, we only need to increase the average consumption per person from 50 milliliters to 100 milliliters per person, and we've doubled the size of the market. So I don't feel it's unachievable, and hopefully we've got a bit of a road to make that happen. I want to thank all of you so much for joining me today. Your input, as ever, has been invaluable. Thank you, Akiko-san. I know it's getting a bit late with you. Thanks, Barry. Thanks, Miho. And I'll hand back to Justin and Chris in the studio.
We'll come back to the studio.